I don't believe that we ever are broken. I believe that we're whole and just disconnected from some parts of ourselves that weren't safe to be included.
Well, hey, welcome back to the Amanda Kaufman Show. And today I get to pick the brain of Christy Holt. She is AKA the Happiness Hussy. So fun. And she is an expert in how do you live your life in a way that feels very aligned and very in love. And she is a relationship expert, and she is here and also has very good taste in country of origin, because I was also born in Canada. So hello and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Yay, Canada.
Yay, Canada. So good. Well, why don't you just take 30 seconds and catch us up on what you're working on these days? And then we're going to just dive right in. I want to pick that brain about relationships and loving yourself.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And as you mentioned, I call myself the Happiness Hussy. I am an author of several books, but I'll say that my signature book on the topic that we're going to be talking about today is called Love Unstuck. And this is ultimately about creating those healthy, happy relationships in which you can truly thrive and be happy. So I think that's what most of us are looking for. And with a twist, which we'll get to in the conversation. I'm also a podcaster. I have my own show called Create Your Happy, which is all about, you guessed it, conscious relationships and with others and with yourself. And I knew this was going to be a juicy conversation because when we were chatting, we realized that so much of what your message is and so much of what my message is, even though we're not necessarily both speaking about business or coaching per se, it's the same message. So here's an opportunity for us to take some stuff, audience, that you might already know and apply it to a different area of your life so that you can really maximize that love experience, not just the success experience. So yeah, super excited to dive in.
I'm so excited. And thank you so much for being here on the show, because I just actually finished a coaching call in our First Five Club. And I was talking about how in business, it really is ultimately all about relationships. So, when we struggle as business owners, very often, one of the things I zoom in on right away is, how are your relationships? Are you somebody who's just hyper vigilant around relationships and you don't have very many? Maybe you have a lot of relationships, but there's not a lot of depth. There's not a lot of trust there. And it's kind of interesting because usually when people are coming to me, it's more about how do I build a business? How would I grow my revenue? How do I get my marketing to work a lot better? And those are all amazing, valid questions. But when you double click down, when you really get into it, it's how do you connect with other human beings? That has a lot to do with how you also connect with yourself. So
I was just going to say, and then you double click again and you realize it's all you, right? That, and just like you kind of touched on, I'll say lots of people are wondering, how can I get my husband to blah, 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 or how can I get my wife, or how can I get my partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, to change? And I'll say, you don't. You're the one who you can change. That's it. And listen, 2 hands up, because I've done this more than once, more than twice. Let's be fair. I have waited for someone else or circumstances to change, which was not me in my power. I think we've all been there, right? So yeah, this is about shifting that, really reclaiming your power, and ultimately shifting the focus to where it's going to make a difference, right? Instead of looking and chasing outside of yourself for all of these circumstances and other people to shift, the magic happens when you shift first.
Okay, so we got to unpack that, right? Yeah. But what if it really is his fault? Can you give us an example of, how this tends to show up a lot with people that you work with?
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? I also have been that person who has pointed the finger and spent a great deal of my own energy blaming, complaining, pointing fingers, and making sure it was everyone else's fault because that feels more comfy to me. But I was still stuck in it. As long as I was doing that, I was actually just stuck in it until I sort of had this aha moment, holy crap, I'm the common denominator, which could have gone down a shame spiral. Thankfully, I had the tools in my toolbox to recognize that wouldn't be helpful. And it allowed me the space to realize that I'm also the common solution to all of those same problems. And so I often say it's not a relationship problem. And I know this might like get someone activated, and that's fine. I'm totally here for activating people into their power. It's not a relationship problem. It's an identity problem, which if you solve that identity problem, you solve the problem of other people mistreating you, right? Yes, maybe it's not a healthy relationship. I've been in one of those, and I'll tell you what, it was the hardest decision that I ever made to leave my second marriage. And it was the most worthwhile decision and most life-changing trajectory that it put me on. That I can't say there was another decision that I've made that has been as important as that one where I chose myself in my relationship. And that's really what I mean when it's not, relationships can be challenging. And if you're not in the right relationship, and there's no real right or wrong, but the right one for you, like where it's a match, where it's aligned, if you're not, you're going to have a lot more challenges than if you actually know who you are. You bring that to the table with confidence, and then you find your people. I think a lot of people go off track because, well, listen, the good girl conditioning is strong. The nurturing, people-pleasing tendency amongst all humans, but more so women, as is just the gender stereotypes, gets in our way of actually helping creating meaningful connection, right? It blocks us from the very thing we want most because we're not showing up authentically as ourselves. We are showing up as the version of ourselves that we believe will be accepted, will be fit in, will be loved, instead of owning who we truly are. Being brave and courageous enough to be that authentic version of ourselves and letting the people who are for us come into our world. We try too hard, right? Sometimes we're just doing too much. And so if we can scale back and refocus on who am I? What is it that I want? What do I want to create in my life? And we start from that place, it just gives us so much more opportunities to create something really, really epic.
So you mentioned like you discovered so much of this based on an aha moment that you had, and you referenced like, well, I had tools in my toolbox to do that. But can you tell us a little bit more about that originating moment? Like, how did you snap to? Like, how did you realize that you were in patterns that were not helpful to your relationship? Like, can you tell us a little more about maybe what some of the signals were or the signs?
Yeah, you know what, Amanda, I had sort of this like wake up call, and the analogy that I like to use to describe it is, you know how sometimes you're driving home, but you're I don't know, you're in the music, you're in your head, you're not really paying attention to driving. Like you're just driving on autopilot. You get home and you don't recall stopping at the stop signs or the stop lights or whatever else. You don't really remember the drive at all. You're home now and you got there. So yay. That's how I kind of came to this realization in my marriage. Something happened, and it's not about the details, because the details could be anything, but something happened where I was like, hold on. Like, how did I get here? Because I don't remember allowing whatever I must have allowed and tolerated to get to this point where this situation arose and like he thought it was okay. And so I kind of just had this moment where like, I have been tolerating some things, justifying things, making excuses for things, putting up with things, silencing myself, making myself small without needs. I know everybody out there has probably done this, in one way or another in their life. And I just got to the point where I was like, this isn't working. It's not working. And I had been working with a therapist at the time who walked me through an exercise of getting clarity about what it was that I really truly wanted in a partnership. And now a lot of people have a list, right? 6'5", blue eyes, trust fund. I don't know, there's a song. It got caught in my head there for a second. My list was none of that. And not because those aren't, fine qualities to have in a partner, but my list was something different. And I think this is what actually shifted everything for me. My list was the things that I wanted to experience in partnership, how I wanted to feel in that partnership, not physical characteristics or financial statistics or anything like that. It was, how was my experience going to be? I wanted someone to laugh with. I wanted someone who, like, we were just passionate and couldn't keep our hands off of each other. And, you know, we could have deep, meaningful conversations. We could talk about hard stuff and not threaten each other with any kind of, you know, breakup or anything like that. Just to be able to just be with each other and accept each other. And so I had this list, which I'll tell you what, I found my partner who matched everything on the list and then some when I wasn't looking, because I think that's also how it works, is you get clarity and then you just take your hands off, right? And you wait and you meet people, you go out and do the things that you love to do, because that's probably where you're likely to meet other people who like to do those things that you love to do. And I met my current partner. We've been together 7 years now. We met while running a marathon. Like a literal marathon. He was the pacer for my goal time of 4 hours and 15 minutes. And we just got to chatting because running a marathon is really freaking hard. So near the last hour or so, the wheels were starting to fall off the bus a little bit. You know, my knees were like screaming at me, like, what are you doing? My brain was just chattering. And part of me was like, it's just one more hour, which sounds absurd. I know. But when you're in it, it doesn't seem that absurd. So I ended up chatting him up and we just connected. And it was so crazy how at that point in my journey, I was not looking for a partner, but I had this clarity so I could recognize it when this amazing human came into my life. I was like, okay, I wasn't looking. I actually didn't want a relationship. I was actually pretty content to just have some space for myself. But there he was. And so I think like one of the key first steps is really getting clarity and not just about those silly things that the world has taught us that we're supposed to care about, but how it's really going to feel for us.
I love that. You know, really deepening into what is your value system. And, you know, I think sometimes when it comes to relationships, and again, you know, I spend more time talking with people about business relationships, but I really actually see this as being true there too, where if you have a lot of clarity about, I love working with people like this, I don't love working with people like that, right? Like if you can get really, really clear before you go networking, before you go join the masterminds, before you go do the things, and like literally follow more of your joy. But it does require just like slowing down and saying like, well, what's my joy? And giving yourself that vote, right? Like, and so I'm curious, like, what's your take on why people struggle, I think, to get into that clarity moment? What do you think is, because like you had somebody you were partnering with, right? Like you were working with your therapist at the time and she was asking you those questions. So like, what would you recommend to somebody who is like, okay, great, I get it, I have to have clarity, but maybe they feel a little stuck in actually doing that?
Yeah, I mean, the first step would be creating safety, because a lot of times we cannot see clearly when we're in survival mode. And if we don't have tools to regulate our nervous system and we just haven't been taught, and that's okay. It's not something that they're regularly teaching in school, not for me anyway. We need to just be able to create space to breathe, because when we are regulated, we see more of the available options for us and we can consciously choose which of those things feel really good in our bodies. And also we can feel what feels good in our bodies, right? When we're in survival, fight or flight, we tend to disconnect from our bodies. And so we can't really tap into what we know inside. And so in order to, and this is actually kind of the topic of my first book, not specific to this, but getting out of those states of overwhelm and overthinking is so powerful. That is essentially what my first topic of my first book was about, because you can't consciously choose when you're on autopilot and your past experiences are just recreating themselves over and over. It feels like you have no control. That's a little bit how I felt in that relationship, until I realized, well, hold on a minute. I'm actually just along for the ride, and I'm not actually consciously choosing or creating the things that I can, which essentially is my response, my experience, how I deal with what life throws at me. So maybe end up in a relationship with someone who is not emotionally intelligent. Maybe they use some other tactics like shame or gaslighting or stonewalling. Experience them all. And yeah, that's not healthy. But there's a part of you that's there tolerating it. And the whole aim of this is to take back your power so that you're not tolerating any of those mistreatments, right? So that you're standing up and saying, hey, I deserve better. Because everyone deserves better. Nobody deserves to be mistreated or, looked down upon. And I actually see sort of like this whole healing industry, I'm going to even say, because it has become an industry. I see it differently than a lot of people, which strive to point out where you're broken so that they can provide the solution to fix your problem. And I don't think that you're broken. I don't think you're broken at all. I think that the world has told you that you're broken. I agree that at times we can feel broken, but I don't believe that we ever are broken. I believe that we're whole and just disconnected from some parts of ourselves that weren't safe to be included, right? So often our emotions can end up in that category. And especially, you know, as women, we're not supposed to be angry, right? It's okay if we're a bit sad, but don't be angry, don't be raging, because that will get you labeled all kinds of things that are not a good girl or not a nice girl, even though those emotions are entirely valid. So anyways, I view healing not as like some like method of fixing yourself, but a return, a remembrance of the wholeness that you are, because you're not broken. You don't need fixing. You know, you're just a human who sometimes forgets the magical wholeness that is you.
It's so true. You know, I'm being in the coaching space, the coaching industry, and just like talking about the vibes healing thing, right? It is unfortunate because I think a lot of people thinking about relationships, they're kind of getting suckered into magical thinking instead of like that reinforcing thinking. And something that occurred to me as you were sharing is like, you know, gosh, thinking about my own life in the relationships over the years, I just didn't have skills. Like I wasn't raised, you know, I was raised as I was raised, just like so many of us were. And it's like, you know, it's a more recent thing, I think, for society to be like, oh, emotional regulation. Let's talk about our feelings. Let's talk about emotions. And I do think that because so many people just didn't have a lot of that conversation when they're cruising the internet and they come across like, you will be healed with this magical way of doing things. And it's like, it seems a little more like you're building skills and that you would be building like ways that you assert yourself, not looking for, again, like kind of a magical answer so much as realizing
some soft skills. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people didn't have a healthy example or healthy role models. Listen, it's not our parents' fault either. They also just didn't know what they didn't know. And research now is definitely giving us more information. Heck, people in our parents' generation would have probably thought that our brains finished developing at a certain age, and that's that. We now know that's not true. Our brains continue shifting, changing, growing, developing. We can change those neural pathways at any point in time in our entire life. So, you know, when we have these challenges to the existing thought paradigms, wait a minute. We can do things differently. And I think that we're alive in a very exciting time because we're now connected globally, which means we can share these things so much more easily with so many more people. And just like you said, like these things, this is not just about your romantic relationship. It's not. It's about the way that you collaborate with other people. It's the way that you interact with your clients. It's the way that you interact with the neighbors or people around you. It's the way that you receive things on social media. You know, what we're talking about here is the foundation of all of it. Relationships with everything external to yourself. Excuse me. That's where the real change happens, is when you work on that foundation, and that's learning to love yourself. And it is not like bubble baths and pedicures.
Although we like those.
Those are nice. Those are great. Those are self-care, not self-love. Self-love, I recently heard it put that self-love is really loving and accepting yourself no matter what's happening, right?
Radical self-acceptance. Yes. Here for that all day.
Owning that you are worthy of love, even if you make a mistake, because you're going to make a mistake. We all do. We're human. We can't help it. That's how we learn and grow. And honestly, if you're not making mistakes, I don't think you're trying hard enough, right? To learn, to grow, to evolve, to have experiences. And I guess everyone teaches their own. Some people like a different kind of, like, I love growth. I love learning. I love exploring and trying new things. That's my personality, and having a lot of fun doing it. Not everyone likes that, but nonetheless, your experience of the world around you, it doesn't exist apart from going through your filter. So when you shift how you are experiencing, how you are receiving the information, and how you're responding to it, things change around you. It's not like magical woo-woo, like law of attraction. And it is. it is and it isn't. It's not just like some magical thing. It's the way that we create our experience, right? It can't just happen over there. We have to perceive it and interpret it. Mm-hmm. And if we're not intentional about how we're doing that, it might not be what we want.
Exactly. I love this. And Christy, if people wanted to keep up with you and learn more, what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, as you know, I am a Facebook girly through and through. So all the places, but Facebook is where I mostly love to hang out. I love the sense of community there. And so I would love to connect with new people. Please tell me where you came from so that I can accept you right away, because I know that the friend requests and the bots and everything on there is a lot to weed through. So I would love to connect with real, genuine human beings. Not with bots. So definitely let me know that you heard this show and that's where you're coming from. And I would love to have a further conversation with you.
Love it. And dear listener, we've got Christy's contact information and her website and everything in the show notes for the episode. Christy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I hope that all of your listeners took a little nugget, something that they can go forth and just think about things a little bit differently, whether they apply it to their romantic relationship or their relationship with business or food or money or anything.
Exactly. And you know what? I'm willing to bet that they did. And dear listener, if that is true, make sure that you share the love and you grab the link to this episode and send it to 3 of your friends who are working on their self-love, working on their relationships, their connection. Just send it along to 3 of them and brighten their day. And by the way, before you go, don't forget to hit subscribe. Don't rely just on my Instagram posts to find out when a new episode is out. Make sure you hit subscribe. And the thing that will help like the most, like just if I'm being completely honest, if you want to share some love, it is to leave us, of course, an honest review. So if you're loving the show, tell us how you love it. And when you do that, it lets new people decide whether they want to spend some time with us. And we are always, always so grateful for you doing that. Until we meet again, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. And we will see you on another one very soon.